Talking financial organization in a professional practice does not have to be boring. Are you ready for a few money in, money out ideas? It's Susan Gunn coming directly to your head to make you think. Can you handle the truth? Because she is known for being energetic, laughs a lot, and gives honest, sometimes direct, but always practical advice. It's time now for Money In, Money Out.
If ever overseeing your numbers was an important task for any business owner, it's now. I think I've said this for every podcast since I started, but I cannot emphasize this enough. You have to know where you are today so you know if you're making progress for next month. And by knowing, I don't mean just checking your bank balance. That's not good business management skills, if you will. Most important now, not only because of what we've been through since March, but because it's not over yet. This financial landscape has changed and is still in the process of changing. There's a new norm, but even the new norm will not be the norm by the end of the year. In fact, it's almost as if there's no normal at all, at least not on the immediate horizon. I used to joke when I got my degree in psychology that according to the diagnostic manual, the DSM, which was 3 at the time I got it, there was no such thing as normal. I've laughed so many times about how that applies right now. There is no such thing as normal. So knowing that, you may have to change how you oversee your business from how you have overseen it in the past. The first step is recognizing the need for the changes. The second step is making them. If anything, what is to be learned is that all businesses will require a deeper look into their finances. Not one business has not been affected the past few months in some way. Going forward, out and through this crisis and the crises to follow will require careful oversight by every business owner. Measuring the success of the oversight will be judged by comparing the reports that are reviewed. And today, we are honored to have Virginia Moore of Moore Practice Success Consulting with us. She is a longtime friend and is known for her teaching dentists how to achieve greater productivity, profitability, and happiness. Like me, she teaches her clients the importance of reviewing their reports. I teach them how to organize it so that they'll understand them. And Virginia teaches them what all those numbers mean and which percentages are important to watch. And Virginia was a contributor to the Money In, Money Out book on this very topic. I've been trying to figure out a way to have Virginia on my podcast since the very beginning, and I am so excited to have you here today, Virginia.
Well, Susan, thank you so much because I'm just as excited as you are. And especially for us to talk about such an important and timely subject. There's no better time to really understand your dental business than now. So looking forward to launching into this with you.
Yeah, no kidding. In fact, we've been friends almost since I began my business 23 years ago.
Yeah.
I think we first met at the Academy of Dental Management Consultants meeting.
Yes. And you know what? I remember that.
2001, right after September 11th.
Yeah.
In fact, I often tell the story in my convention presentations of how I attended your ADA Las Vegas presentation on numbers and how it changed. That one presentation changed my thought process of what was needed for the chart of accounts for dentistry. I mean, think about that. That was 2004, I can tell you. 2003, I think, was when the presentation, or maybe it was 2004.
Right around that time. And, you know, I just love hearing, and I know because we've talked about it so often in the recent years, of the impact it had. I mean, that's my goal is when I speak is to impact people, get them to look at things differently. And I think my favorite thing from that is how the two of us were able to blend our teachings and developing that chart of accounts that you have. So Yeah, it was a very fortuitous time for us.
Well, and I know that the practice management chart of accounts has really changed the whole thought process of tracking and reporting in dentistry. And so it's amazing to know the impact that just sitting in that course had. It was a huge ballroom, like 300 something people. So it was like I was a little intimidated when you called on me in the class, but it was a fun time and it was a real learning experience.
I don't think of you and intimidated together.
I can be, yeah, as well as the intimidating, I know. So you've been teaching doctors for a long time on
Yeah,
how to manage their numbers and kind of how to process in the teaching, but I know that some of that's changed the last few months.
Susan, I think as we all would agree, boy, a lot has changed in the last couple of months. And I will tell you from my perspective and how I've always seen the importance of numbers and understanding the business of your dental practice. A lot of light was shed on this. And I'll tell you where this jumped out at me the most was when I would get calls from doctors who had gone to my website or read an article or heard me speak and say, I'm applying for a PPP grant or loan, and I'm not sure what information to put in there. So what it revealed to a lot of doctors, unfortunately, was that they're not staying on top of collecting, analyzing, and taking action on the metrics and numbers of their practice. So to me, that was one of the biggest eye openers of the last couple of months is in process of applying for a PPP. I think a lot of doctors were realizing I don't have a good handle on what is my true overhead. Um,
Right.
what numbers do I put in for these things? How much do I request the amount for a PPP loan? And of course, there were unknown variables. I mean, my goodness, I think back to when practices shut down, and how many of us dreamed they'd be closed 2, 3 months? That was
No
unfathomable.
kidding.
I've never seen that in my career of 30 years. And again, I think it brings to light the fact that we must start paying attention to this in greater detail.
Well, I think it's easy when we don't have a crisis that's on the horizon
Sure.
to say, we don't, someone else keeps track, our CPA keeps track of that,
Mhm.
but when you don't have immediate access to those numbers or the CPA hasn't had an opportunity to bring those accounts up to date, if you will, to provide you those reports, um, and for you not to even know how to access them,
That's just
that's 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 extremely sabotaging the business,
right.
crippling them. Yeah,
Mhm.
I had a lot of those phone calls too. I guess, it was like, we've been wanting to do QuickBooks for a while and have now decided that we should do that. So,
Right.
because we don't know where these numbers come from.
Exactly. And some of those calls were quite frankly heartbreaking.
Yeah.
When you have a doctor on the phone in tears, it breaks my heart because it can be different. And I think that's where I love what you do, what I do, and in order to bring hope and success to doctors is help them to understand, and it does not have to be overwhelming. I think the other thing that this pointed out is the importance as a business owner to be nimble, um,
Yes.
to be able to bob and weave and roll with things. And some practices just weren't in that position, and they're taking the biggest hits. So, again, what I want to reiterate is number one, collect the important data. Number two, know how to analyze that. And number three is how to respond. I think that's really key.
Nimble. I like that word.
Mhm.
I'm just like stuck. I keep thinking about it. That we never use that word anymore.
No, it's not a word you see or hear frequently. And through the last couple of months, I've just seen practices that, like you said, they called you to say, well, we're ready to start, QuickBooks. But that means that up until that point, they were not able to respond quickly to whatever
Right.
situation, whether it was COVID-19 or my overhead's out of control. I'm not taking home what I want to be able to take home, whatever it is. And so being nimble is very important. And in my opinion, and I know in yours as well, it starts with understanding your business, understanding the numbers.
Yeah, I had one of those phone calls that after I trained them how to do their QuickBooks, this just in the last few months, they said, no joke. Is it really as easy as this? I've kind of put it off,
Yes.
thinking it was more difficult. And I tell them all the time in the presentations, it's really not hard,
Right.
especially if you do it with the process that I recommend. It's not hard at all because everything downloads now.
Yes.
So that makes it so much easier.
And that,
But
yes. And that is a message that I hope those listening will really hear loud and clear from us, that this does not have to be horribly overwhelming or insurmountable. It's doable. And
yeah, in fact, I always tell them, okay, so the practice software is 85% of the accounting. And they never think of it as the practice software being an aspect of the accounting, but
mm,
it is. It's accounts receivable and it's 85%. And their practice software is so much more difficult than QuickBooks ever dreamed about being.
yes, yes.
And it's only 15% of the accounting.
Hmm.
So when you put it in perspective of that, it's like, why are you fearing it? Just don't call it accounting, call it financial organization.
Yes, I like that. That, that sounds much more approachable. Financial,
Yeah.
yeah,
And be nimble. I'm going to use that now. I really like that. Be nimble.
we've got two new terms.
Yeah. Be nimble. All right. So what has happened that's different? What have you started recommending that maybe you didn't recommend before?
Well, one thing I will tell you is for many, many years, my recommendations for overhead ranges for dental practice has stayed very constant. And for those who are interested, if you go to my website, there is a chart that will spell this out. My website is virginiamoore, moore.com. On the homepage, scroll down and you'll see healthy overhead ranges for dental practices. And it covers everything from personnel, doctor compensation, minor expenses, and what's included in those. And one thing I do want to say, Susan, I think it's always very important when we talk about overhead ranges to also clarify what's included, because you'll see on my personnel, it's 22 to 33%. And some doctors might think, my gosh, are you kidding me? But what I include are gross wages, fringe benefits, payroll tax. So when you include all that, that is a healthy range. But going back to where I started with this, I have not made a change in those healthy ranges in years. But you know what? Dental supplies has changed now with the PPE requirements. And I'm actually recommending, without turning this into minutia mania, but either raising the dental supply expense from it was 4 to 7% to 4 to 8%, or creating a separate PPE category so you can track what those expenses are. And that to me has been one of the biggest changes because, let's face it, there's a lot of information out there, some of it not accurate, about what may be needed to reopen and practice safely. And I think it's very important for doctors to be able to clearly identify, what have I invested in this? I'm thinking of some of the equipment that's been purchased by some doctors.
Right.
Yeah, that goes beyond masks and gloves and gowns. So creating a separate category for that. One of the other things that I've really encouraged is, there's been, I would say, debate, if you will, about charging a line item fee for PPEs. And I'm not a fan of that. I'm rather recommend that there be a 2 to 3% increase in fees across the board. And I'm going to give you two reasons why. Number one is, I think a line item PPE fee can antagonize, unnecessarily, it can antagonize patients. You'll get a lot of questions, a lot of pushback. Then I also look at all the work that's necessary when insurance companies don't approve it and the adjustments and so forth. Second is, when I look at that 2 to 3% fee increase across the board, I find that most often, which is a sad statement. Most often, doctors are not annually increasing their fee schedule. So now, for those who are, involved in PPOs and have those more limited fee schedules, at least do what you can under your contract to raise those. But bottom line, raise your fee for service, your UCR fees, that 2 to 3% to help offset additional costs in PPE.
I became aware that the state of Maryland released a press release in response to patient complaints about additional charges for PPEs. And they stated in this press release that it potentially could be a violation of the Consumer Protection Act. And they stated that some of the fees ranged from $10 to $172. I couldn't believe that. And so let's have a little general education about the Consumer Protection Act. Actually, I think they were trying to make it, trying to help the dentist decide not to charge by throwing that out there. But generally speaking, it was designed to protect consumers against unsafe and or defective products that could cause injury, property damage, or even death. In light of your practice, the Consumer Protection Act protects patients against unfair practices in your practice. And I quote, such laws are intended to prevent businesses from engaging in fraud or specific unfair practices in order to gain an advantage over competitors or to mislead consumers. Well, I'm not sure that charging for PPE fits these aspects. However, the bill also states that your patients have the right to be informed, the right to choose, the right for safety, the right to be heard, the right to have problems corrected, the right to have consumer education, and the right to service. So I've heard of too many practices not informing their patients of the PPE charge. $10 does seem reasonable, but the greater than that is really questionable. Then I heard, oh my gosh, I was watching the news one night. I told Virginia this, and I just have to tell the listeners. I was watching the news one night a few weeks ago. It was probably like 3 weeks ago now, covering hair salons starting to open in Dallas. And the reporter had interviewed a hair salon and found out what measures they were taking to protect their clients coming in to get their long awaited haircuts, as we had all been thought we were going to die from not going to the hairstylist. And, and it was a really big deal. And so she went through and gave and showed all the measures that they were putting into place. And then at the end of her broadcast, she said, I just received, and held up her phone, by the way, I just received a text message from my doctor that informed my dentist that informed me that they were charging $10 extra for PPE and safety measures that they've put into place. And then she stared at the camera. And then she said, so I went back and I asked the hair salon if they were charging additional money to the consumers. And they said no, that their consumers would not do that. Their clients would not do that. And that it was just the cost of doing business. Now, we all know that PPE in a dental practice is severely different
Yes.
than PPE in a hair salon. I was completely outraged. However, it's that kind of reporting and that kind of, I'm being amazed that the practices haven't notified the number of practices that are not notifying their patients until after they're checking out. That would be a violation. And so I think what you're suggesting, Virginia, is the way to go. For the just increasing the charges of the 2 to 3% sounds like. Now, is this on every treatment?
Great question. I'm someone who is a proponent of keep it simple. And I've heard some doctors say, well, we're going to adjust the percentage based on the procedure, based on the aerosol it creates. And I'm thinking, who has the time to do that study? So yes, I do recommend that it be 2 to 3% across the board, regardless of the procedure. I believe it all evens out in the end. So that's my opinion. And Susan, I have to go back because I'm just sitting here thinking, my goodness gracious, the Maryland press release, when you said from fees of 10 to 172 for PPE, I've got to tell you, I coach, as you know, doctors and their teams on verbal skills, and I'd be hard pressed to come up with verbal skills to defend a line item 172.
I know. Isn't that incredible?
Oh, yeah.
I saw that in the press release and I went,
Wow.
What office is charging $172?
I know. That's pretty gutsy.
Yeah, that's something else. That's a little bit lower than gutsy, but it's incredible. Oh my gosh. I was.
Yeah, that stops you in your tracks.
Yeah, that'd be nice, wouldn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Jeez. So the other thing I wanted to say too, in going back to what you said about separating out the PPE expenses, I will tell you another reason to do that is because of the idle loan.
Yes.
If the practices get an idle loan and their PPEs have increased, of course, because they have to change after every patient and everything, that will increase, they need to separate that out so that they can show it. And so I would definitely do that. And if they have been charging the patients for the $10, they better have some justification for the $10 charge.
Right.
That'd be another reason I would separate out the PPEs. If you are not doing your own QuickBooks, then you need to speak with your accountant and make sure that your accountant is separating out the additional charges for the PPEs, so that you've got that accountability.
Right. And I'd like to add to that, then there also needs to be corresponding appropriate documentation in the patient record of the PPEs used, so that we have a clear documentation or audit trail, if you will, that justifies that. That's
great. So they can, create standardized language for that inclusion, correct?
They can have their templates, but I think it's very important to show how this is different from what we were doing prior to, let's say, March of 2020.
Yeah.
Susan, can I also comment something else that I've seen in light of COVID-19 and all is a lot of doctors I've seen on social media are now thinking, how much sense does it make for me to be involved in a PPO with reduced fee schedules and restrictions and so forth? And while I'm not suggesting just jump right out of those without appropriate study and preparation, what I do recommend is make sure that you are posting full fee so you know what is the cost of being involved in whether it's a PPO or what your professional courtesies are, or bad debt, because that's also an area where doctors I recommend running your expenses against your total production, because regardless if you ever collect on it, it's cost you to produce it. So that's very important. So when you look at my healthy overhead ranges, you'll see that those percentages, that's against production. But once you start to look, I'm just going to use some very round numbers. Let's say in a year you produce 1,200,000, but you've adjusted off 300,000, then your adjusted production is really 900,000, but you had expenses related to 1.2. And that's where you start to see, why do I not have enough cash flow? Why, as a doctor, am I on the compensation plan of taking home what's left over, which makes me cringe? I'm a firm believer that doctors, you must put yourself on a regular compensation. If you're laughing right now thinking, well, yeah, Virginia, how I'd love to do that. That all comes back to planning and having a budget and establishing your goal percentages for these different expense areas. And quite frankly, it's impossible to do that if you don't look at history. And that's where your QuickBooks really comes into play.
Yeah. In fact, Um, when I start using when I start a doctor off in QuickBooks or I clean up an existing QuickBooks file, I create memorized reports for them to review on a weekly and a monthly basis so that they've got some oversight. And oh my gosh, when they've been using for over a year, those previous year comparisons, I use the previous comparisons for the year to year. It's a little discouraging right now with everything that's happened, but it's helpful to know, okay, where am I right now? And what expenses do I have and where do I need to cut some expenses? I had a previous client call me kind of in the beginning of all of this, who said, "Oh my gosh, you're not going to believe this. I finally had time to hone down and look at my expenses, and I've knocked $1,600 off a month, and I'm not finished."
Oh, okay.
It's like, cool.
Yeah.
So,
Music
the
ears.
things that we let slip that we just don't pay attention to.
Exactly. I mean, how many of us do that in our, daily lives? Things that you have auto deduct and then you realize I don't use that service anymore, I use it very rarely. And it's one of those things where, especially when it's auto deduct to your credit card or your bank account, it's easy to overlook that. And that's why really collecting this data, studying it is so important.
Wait, are you saying that the gym membership that I have, I should actually go?
It's really good and
You should take well, I haven't been able to because they've been closed. And they actually it's the Y. I belong to the Y, and they actually sent an email and said, "Thank you for not canceling your membership to everybody."
I bet.
So, yeah, I kind of felt badly for them. And I'll go back when they open, so
Yeah.
it's all good. Um, so we know the QuickBooks reports, the profit and loss is the biggie, and the design of the profit and loss really, your design of your chart of accounts is so important in how you look at your profit and loss report. Um, Tell me about what practice software reports. We know that there's a gazillion different software um, available for practices, but just give an overview of the practice software reports that you think. What are the three most important ones that you recommend that they review, and how often?
Okay. Good point. Not only what to review and the frequency. So, as Susan just said, of course, there's all types of practice management software, and you can run reports, till the cows come home. But the three that I recommend, and it may seem overly simplistic, but again, I want to keep this really straightforward. First of all, your gross and adjusted production. So, in other words, with full fee, what are you producing? And then what is either what I call adjusted production or collectible production. Next would be your collection percentage. And again, and this is where you've got to look into your software, call support, and get clarification. Sometimes the collection percentage will be against your adjusted production. But then what you're missing is what is the cost of those adjustments to you. So if you can get that collection percentage against gross as well as adjusted production. And along with collection percentage is the aging. Oh my goodness. And Susan,
Oh,
I've
yeah.
seen this. A lot of times the issue is not what you're producing, it's that it's not being collected, it's not being acted on. For instance, insurance claims aren't being followed up. And let's face it, once it slides past 60 days, your chances of collecting that in full drop significantly. So the aging of your accounts receivable, I always think of accounts receivable aging numbers as an upside down pyramid. So in other words, your current would be your largest amount and it starts
Exactly.
down to your 90 plus. So,
And how many practices have we seen that it's a real pyramid,
uh-huh. Yeah,
that the aging, the over 90 is way greater? I've
yeah.
actually had the dentist tell me, well, the front desk person just really doesn't like collecting. I'm like, well, then they're in the wrong job, aren't they?
Yeah. Oh my word.
They, do they like collecting their paycheck?
Yeah. Yeah. That's one thing they like to collect.
Yeah. But I'm pretty hard tax about that because
Yeah.
that's the health of the practice.
It is.
And
Sounds like
I
you-
believe in collecting it up front.
Oh, me too.
Yeah.
I always say when I'm working with doctors and teams, please tell me one place where you can go and get a good or a service and not pay at the time, or at least make a significant initial investment. Try going to your grocery store, checking out, and just saying, I'll catch you at my next paycheck. The next call will be to,
Not
hey,
my credit card. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't have enough cash.
yeah. I mean, trying to the gas pumps and not pay. I mean,
Right.
this doesn't work. So, yes, I think we need to be more confident. Here's a good example, Susan. I don't know if you've had this experience during the COVID shutdown, but our beloved lab, Nico, a couple of weeks ago, he was eating like a champ, but I think most labs do. But he was vomiting and everything else seemed fine. So we took him to the vet, and our vet, so even the cars are social distanced in the parking lot.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so you talk to the vet on the phone, a vet tech comes out, takes your dog, and then they keep you updated. Well, Nico was at the vet for 2 nights, and then they ran some tests. Every time they ran a new test, he had a barium for his GI. They would call and let us know what the next stage was, were we in agreement, and what the fee was. So I will tell you that there was absolute transparency in fees. And there was not,
Right.
I talked with the doctor myself several times. There was no embarrassment of, oh, I'm sorry, we're going to have to do this. Or it was just very clear for the fee for this will be, because they recognize that for some people, some pet owners, there's a limit to what they're able or willing to spend. And when Nico finally came home, and I'm so excited to say that he's back to feeling his silly self and eating and keeping it down. But what was interesting is we had no surprises, and we had paid via credit card along the way. So I thought that was really smart that we paid in smaller increments as we approved different procedures.
Right. So they actually charged your credit card at the time that they told you. Yeah. See?
And see, it was made clear to us because of the social distancing and we were not allowed in the facility that that's how payment would be taken care of. Now, I don't know what people did that didn't have a credit card or space available, but I will tell you that I thought it was really handled well. I felt like we were totally in control to say yay or nay, and not to go to pick him up and get, hit over the head with this huge amount.
Right.
Yeah.
Surprise.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. No kidding. So I know, going back to the reports and looking at what they're doing, the collecting part of that,
Mhm.
I know that a lot of practices are using an external data analytics program.
Yeah.
There are so many dental dashboards on the market these days that work with a variety of the practice software. They
Right.
can be great,
Absolutely.
but do you think they're really utilizing them like they should?
Great question, great subject. So first of all, I want to make it clear, I am a fan of dashboards. But you also have to take into consideration what I do. I find them intriguing. I love looking at the data, and I analyze it. So that's me as a dental practice management consultant. I will tell you, unfortunately, what I see is that while they provide tremendous data, I'm not seeing that data is being analyzed and, most importantly, acted upon. Now, so let's go back to the analyzing of the information. First of all, I see that those dashboards provide everything from basic information, how much was produced in a day, collected, and so forth, to in-depth and very sophisticated data, which, I love. Things like patient attrition, unfilled hours, treatment acceptance. And one of the great benefits I see is in that patient attrition, it also has mechanisms to help you capture past due patients. So in that regard, and this is a big if it's analyzed and used properly, it can be a tremendous tool that pays back multiple times of your investment. But again, where I see the breakdown is Are you analyzing the information? And then do you know what action to take on it? So if the numbers are out of whack, um, that's the crux of it. Now, what do I do? And unfortunately, what I see, Susan, is that when those numbers are out of whack and different dashboards use different techniques, a frowny face, a red alert, things like that. For a lot of doctors, it's like, oh my gosh, I don't want to see this. This is panicking me. This is depressing. And so they just stop looking at it. So my big concern is, are you getting ROI from a dashboard?
Right.
And
That means return on investment for those that might be listening that don't know.
yeah. Um, so
Which is what we want with everything that we do in business. We have to have a return on the investment.
absolutely. And what I see is that unless you have that knowledge yourself, or you have a very astute practice administrator who can help take action or plan an approach based on numbers that are not healthy, then I see it unfortunately serving as a source of frustration. So my goal is to help doctors to not only analyze the data, but most importantly, what action do I take as a result of it? Because there's that saying we've all heard: if you continue to do the same thing, and expect a different result. Is definition of insanity. And I really, all joking aside, I think that at this time in our history, we cannot do that. We must be paying attention. And
Yeah, well, that's kind of what I said at the beginning. If we think that we can keep doing the same thing, that's wrong because it's not normal.
and Susan,
And so,
there's something that throughout the years, because I've been teaching and preaching this for 30 years of my consulting speaking career, is that I will tell you, 30 years ago, it was almost a dirty word or saying to say a dentist was a business owner, was a business.
oh, yes. Yeah.
And I have always been a firm believer, if you are not a good business person, and I mean this sincerely, good luck being a great dentist, because how focused can you be on that crown prep when you're sweating it, thinking payroll's coming out of your account today, but there's not enough money in it? What
Right.
business owner is feeling great about doing dentistry when they're worried that their front desk person may be embezzling? So
Right.
understanding and having control over your business helps you to be the dentist that you want to be. Absolutely, and to afford the equipment and the team that will help you to be the best that you can be. So I'm a big proponent of, we must understand the business of the dental practice in order to just be a tremendous dentist.
That's why I get so frustrated. That very thing is why I get so frustrated with accounting professionals that say that dentists should not do their own QuickBooks.
Oh,
Again, it's 15% of the accounting. So why shouldn't they do it? Because it's not that big of a deal. I mean, it's really stinking easy. And when I came on the scene, I mean, remember 24 years ago, it was all about the $1 million dentist.
oh yes,
Remember that?
yes.
And it was when QuickBooks had just started making a scene. I found my niche and started teaching. But then I actually had dentists tell me that their CPA said they could never do QuickBooks,
Oh,
that they shouldn't do QuickBooks.
yes.
And I can't, even then said, but it's only a very small part of what you do. So that I had to kind of get over and just keep plowing, head down, plow ahead, as I say to myself all the time, head down, plow ahead. And I truly do recommend, if you are going to use a dashboard and you are going to review and then make changes, because that's what it's for.
Right.
When your numbers are out of whack, you've got to make changes to put your practice in line, right? But one of the things that has frustrated me, and we've talked about this before, is dental dashboards recommending QuickBooks Online.
Mm.
And if you've heard me speak before, and Virginia knows very well, I do not recommend QuickBooks Online. I think it's very self-serving to recommend an inferior product because they want because they've built their dashboard to work with QuickBooks Online, not the desktop. And I don't understand that because the desktop version is still the superior product to QuickBooks Online. QuickBooks Online is 3 times the cost for a third of the product features. And so, especially for dental practices that uses only 15% of QuickBooks. And so it amazes me that they have built all the connections to the practice management softwares that are not online, but then they require their users to use QuickBooks Online. It doesn't make it's not very logical.
No.
So I'm just like, it's made me very frustrated. And so I don't recommend anyone specific because of that. QuickBooks Online has so many shortcomings that the desktop version, and yet they're all gun ho. I mean, they'll cheer to QuickBooks Online and they cheer because it works with their product, not because it's the best thing for a practice to use. Um, I always think if it's recommended by those who have something to gain, you should be very careful.
Mm-hmm. Good point.
Um, Anyways, that's my little preaching platform for the day. Uh, but I do know there's so many great dashboards out there that can give them the benefit. There was a practice software that works with QuickBooks Enterprise that is greatly expensive. And I said, you're getting off of that. You don't even need to be connected. There's no reason to have that connectivity.
Yeah.
And so I teach that back-to-back accountability, but there's no reason to integrate from one software to another because it's not seamless. And
You know,
so
I just have to jump in here and say, for everyone listening, how wonderful to have a sage, to have a resource like Susan to help. Because if this is not your territory, if you're just getting into, looking at the business of your practice, Susan has such great experience, can recommend these things. Otherwise, it's like, well, yeah, that makes sense, I guess, because so and so said that's what we need to do. So thank you for providing that resource to dentists.
it's been fun. It's been really cool this year, more than any other year. In fact, Teresa Duncan and I've talked before about how sometimes we as consultants and speakers are kind of the last ones to know if we've made a difference in a practice.
Right.
If you're there long term and you work with a practice long term, then you get to see the changes that you make. But I'm what I call PRN. I'm a consultant as they need it. And so I don't always see the changes or the differences that I make. And just this year, I think with everything that's happened, I've gotten so many phone calls. It's really sweet of you to say that, Virginia, but it's been so amazing. It's been really cool to get the phone calls and from accountants even that have said, "Oh my gosh, you've really made a difference in my clients' practice, and I just wanted to thank you."
Wonderful.
It's
Wonderful.
been good to hear that because sometimes you only hear the negative.
Right.
Those are the ones we hear the most. And so to hear the positive was really good.
Great.
Anyway, thank you for saying that.
Absolutely.
Anything else that we need to talk about as far as what they need to oversee that we've skipped?
Well, I do want to hop back for just a moment when you were asking about practice software reports. We talked about collection and aging. Just to give a quick tip on that 90 plus percentage, I recommend it be no more than 15 to 18% of the total accounts receivable. And I'm going to add something to this. That is 15 to 18% of total accounts receivable, but they all have some sort of payment plan. So it doesn't, 15 to 18% doesn't work if those are people that you haven't been able to reach in 4 months and so forth. So I just wanted to wrap that up, and also say that, what have we left out? I think that, I thank you so much. I think we've provided some very good information. What I will say is, for listeners, you may feel overwhelmed at this point, and I completely understand this. There's so much going on for you right now. But I will also encourage you to say, once you get this in hand, the numbers of your practice, and start to understand them and take action on them, things change remarkably. Like Susan, you were commenting on, recommendations of doctors not being involved in QuickBooks and so forth. It is literally, and I'm not exaggerating, through the years when I've had clients get back into signing, maybe they're not producing the checks, but they're signing the checks. It's an eye opener. It's like, we're spending how much on this? So
Right.
have your finger on the pulse of your practice. And something that I want to add, in some practices, it will be very appropriate to have a practice administrator. And what I do want to say about that is, a practice administrator who understands the numbers can come to you, doctor, with the analysis and recommendations for action to be taken. And that can take a lot off of your plate. But remember this, even if you have that person, don't abdicate, delegate. Because if you abdicate, next call is going to be to Susan, Governor, about where did my money go? So I'm a big fan of having an excellent practice administrator. In fact, I teach a program. I have a consulting service, one-on-one, to develop practice administrators so that they can do these things. But again, I just want to impress upon you, never abdicate, because, like I said, your next call will be to Susan for her certified fraud exam.
Yeah. Abdicating does not mean you cease overseeing.
Right.
That's where I think is when the practices get in trouble,
Mm-hmm.
and it becomes too tasty of a morsel to not steal,
Right.
when no one's looking. So I tell this in my fraud classes a lot. I know someone who stole, and when asked why they stole, they said it was easy.
Oh boy. Yeah.
So if no one is overseeing the books and others that are not owners, now having said that, I've actually had spouses steal too. So knowing that, you still, if you're the owner of the practice, you need to oversee the practice. That really is the bottom line. To the extent of that, depends on your available resources, whether that's working with a practice administrator, teaching them. And I know that Virginia also tells them what reports to provide to you. In fact, we were joking about that the other day. Providing reports to you means you don't leave it on your desk, but you actually take them home. So it kind of gives the appearance that you actually are reviewing the reports. What a concept, right? So that's the benefit of having someone you can delegate to. But again, if you don't, then it doesn't take, I say, 2 to 3 hours a week max, and that includes payroll. So it can be worked to a good solution, customized for your practice. And if you need help with any of that, that's what Virginia and I do. So, one other thing I thought of when you were going back, how often do you, what is the process for sending statements that you recommend?
I recommend that they be, well, first of all, a minimum of statements, because my goal is to have over-the-counter collection. So,
Yes,
yeah.
me too.
Yeah. So it's a handful of statements. I remember the days when it was, 300-400 statements a month, and it took days. And, those days are long gone. You literally cannot afford to do that any longer. So maybe those handful of statements are going to, one to Mrs. McGillicuddy, who's been with the practice for 32 years. And the minute she gets the statement, she pays. And she'd be very upset to be asked for her credit card at the time of service, that type of thing. So I recommend that they be sent out really on a daily basis. I think that any distance between time of service and being asked for payment diminishes the return. There's
Yes.
a direct correlation. And we see that certainly when insurance is involved. It's like, well, I'll wait for my insurance to pay. And if you're doing that, oh, please, please stop. Because then patients disassociate themselves with responsibility for the balance. They think, well, I have insurance, so I don't have to pay, or I only pay after my insurance pays. That's a great way to watch your cash flow dry up or shrink considerably.
Yeah. And so the question I would pose to the doctors are, do you know what's being done?
Oh,
I actually had a practice.
great
You're
question.
not going to believe this.
Okay.
I mean, seriously, not going to believe this. That had not collected for years. And he found out when the practice manager left. And they found a whole bunch of uncollected and wondered why the collections was so high. The over 90 days, I mean, it was unbelievable.
Mhm.
There were balances in 2015, 2016 that had not been collected, and
Um,
they actually sent them statements. And I said, well, it's probably not a good idea. I think that's your fault that they didn't go out, not the patients.
yeah,
And, I mean, if they're using health savings accounts or whatever, it's way beyond when they can
yeah,
claim that from there. But I
yeah,
just, I was amazed, and they thought it would be okay. That was the other part. But if you don't know how old your balances are, you need to know.
absolutely.
Run run that aging report and find out.
Right, because on most of the softwares, when you run an aging report that shows each balance due and patient name and so forth, you're also going to see there should be one column that says last statement sent.
Yeah.
And
And some say last payment.
exactly. So, that's one of the, when I do a practice analysis, that's one of the reports that I get, and I'm using a highlighter like crazy so that we can identify those. And it also tells a great tale, like you said. Are there statements going out? How frequently? And what kind of follow up or lack thereof occurs with
Right.
practice? Because that tells the story of our cash flow is not what it should be.
So in the fraud cases, I see that a lot,
I bet.
by the way, a
Yeah.
lot.
Yep.
So it's not necessarily indicative of fraud, but indicative of not collecting what could be easy to collect. And
Right.
it's almost it's just an indicator. I'm always a heads up if I see that.
Well, in my opinion, it's fraud of a different nature. It's lack of
Yes,
knowing your job responsibility, and that can lead to disaster within the practice.
right. Well, it's sabotaging the practice,
Yeah,
financial health for sure. So, well, that golly, we are at 52 minutes, but I had one more thing I kind of wanted to say. I always try to close to encourage you guys. Virginia and I were talking yesterday about everything that's happened these past few months in the dental industry. From what I've read on Facebook posts, I sadly have lots of material for my ethics presentations in the future. Virginia and I both care greatly with what has happened to and in the dental practice these past months. 99% of all the dentists are truly trying to provide a safe work environment for the practice. They are as concerned about their health as they are their team's health and their patients' health. They don't want to put anyone in danger. And yet, from some of the posts that I've read, you would think the dentists were villains. Some of the words I've read to describe those I care about in an industry I care about: greedy, selfish, making us come back to work. Those are just a few of the heartbreaking words that have been posted in Facebook groups. So, if you're a dentist, though you have been verbally assaulted on most fronts, I would compel you to continue to take the high road. Most of those words have been said from emotional irrational fear from people that have been home for months and are deeply afraid of what the future holds. Fear translates to hurtful words in most cases, and you lashing back at those words will not help the situation. Common sense sure seems to be in short commodity these days, apparently. I asked one of my dentist clients the other day who had been irrationally, brutally, verbally assaulted by a team member if we could just move on to January 2021 on July 1st. My heart breaks for all that I have read and I've heard. If you are a team member listening to this podcast, please take the time to show your practice owner who is doing their very best to navigate these unknown waters. Show them your appreciation and your care. Encourage them and everyone else that's at the team with kind words. The frustrations and concerns with COVID-19 are not gone, and they appear to be getting worse before they get better, as I saw today that Dallas has reported the most hospital cases of COVID-19 since the pandemic began. It still seems so surreal that we are in this time. In fact, the American Dental Association canceled their meeting in October today, or made the announcement. In the meantime, we still are all in this together. We got to remember that. We have to choose to be kind. We have to choose, whether we feel it or not, we have to choose to be kind. Make your post on Facebook kind-hearted and encouraging, not adding fuel to a fire that truly does not need to burn. As my parents used to say, in the simplistic form, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say it. Or let me put that in the Texas twang that I heard it in. If you don't have anything nice to say, just don't say it. Got it? Let's just be kind. Thank you, Virginia. This has been such a pleasure. Man, what a packed time we had. I can't believe it's been 57 minutes, but that is 57 minutes of amazing material.
Well, Susan, I've got something nice to say, so I'm going to say it.
Okay, be kind.
Being kind is not at all hard to do when the two of us get together. Susan, you are a blessing to many through the work that you do with QuickBooks and as a certified fraud examiner. And coupled with that, your integrity makes me so thankful to call you a trusted colleague and friend. So thank you for having me on your podcast. And I think we both agree we could go on and on.
Yeah, no kidding. Good thing I said it's usually 25 to 30 minutes, right?
Divided by that so well.
So just to take Virginia's words, everybody be nimble. I'm going to use that. We got to learn to be nimble during these times. So thanks, and we will talk to you the next time.
That's a wrap for this podcast of Money In, Money Out. Thanks for listening. Be sure to write down the most valuable tip you learned today so you don't forget it. And remember, you can find out more about all the valuable books and services Susan has to offer at www.susangunsolutions.com.